whole point of the international system today is to so that it does not happen.
Thank you for leading yourself into Joe. The first question, the big thing that we want to focus about, what peace means to everyone. How is it being kept in 2025? And the biggest representation from a very macroscopic level is the UN Security Council. Does everyone know what the UN Security Council is? Great, so we're going to start off with that.
Right.
Joe, so what is the UN Security Council?
So after World War II, the United Nations was set up to prevent any such thing happening again.
Sorry, Joe, before I interrupt, before I continue, was there something before the United Nations?
Yes, there was something called the League of Nations, which had all sorts of structural problems that we won't get into. And also the U.S. didn't join. And it did not work. Let's put it that way. But after World War II, World War II brought on a level of total war that we had never seen before. The degree of weapons that could be used, the total destruction of cities, the sheer number of people who were killed, tens of millions of people. And everyone just kind of realized we can't do this again. And so the United Nations was set up, and there are several different aspects of the United Nations, several different organs that do different things. The two that I'll mention specifically are there's the General Assembly, which is all of the world's countries, and there's currently 193 of them. And they all meet, and there's a big hall where they all sit, and each one of them gets to vote on, it's one vote. The United States has one vote, Micronesia has one vote, Nauru with 10,000 people has one vote. But that's basically, the thing about being in the General Assembly is you're a country and everyone recognizes, or most people recognize that you're a country. And that's sort of what it's about. It's the democratic body. And it is able to do some things, but it does not really handle peace and security. The idea after World War II to maintain security was something called the Security Council was set up. And the Security Council does not have 193 members, it has 15. There are 5 permanent members who are always there: the United States, France, Britain, Russia, and China. They are always there. They are permanent members, and critically, they can veto anything. And that's going to be a major part of what we're talking about today. The other 10 members rotate every 2 years, and different countries run for that. So Japan, who I work for, just served on the Security Council for 2 years, 2023 and 2024. But they left the council in 2025, and Japan has served on the council 12 times. And this is one of the issues, is there are many more powerful, prosperous, major countries who are not permanent members who wind up running again and again and again. And so a large swath of the UN membership has never served on the Security Council. And there's a huge debate. It's sort of like, if you're a tiny island state with only tens or hundreds of thousands of people, should you be on the Security Council because it's democratic and all countries should serve, or should you not be on the Security Council because one of the prerequisites is contributing substantially to peace and security, which smaller countries just can't do to the same scale. In general, there are exceptions. But yeah, that's the point of the Security Council, was that basically the world powers, the victorious powers in World War II, the 3 Western countries, the US, France, and the UK, and then China and Russia. It was the Soviet Union originally, would be the guarantors of peace and security. And so the whole thing is set up that basically those 5 countries make sure that peace is maintained. And the Security Council has a bunch of powers. They can impose sanctions on countries, which can be really devastating. They can authorize peacekeeping missions and send troops to places. There are no UN troops. Other countries contribute troops. But the Security Council can do many things. but only if you get those 5 powers to work in concert to agree. And so immediately the UN ran into trouble after the Second World War, after it was founded, because the Cold War got underway. And so you had to get the Soviet Union and the United States to agree on the UN doing anything. Unsurprisingly, that was very difficult, and the UN was unable to solve a lot of the world's problems. But after the Cold War, there was this period where the UN could be really effective. The sanctions regimes on North Korea for its nuclear weapons program, Iran for its nuclear program. And these are serious sanctions that really affect these countries. And partly because Russia and China were relatively weak, but also partly because there was this general concert of this is the way, we're all on the same team now. The UN was able to be very active, very effective. It wasn't always, what it didn't always work. Obviously there were major peacekeeping failures in Rwanda and Somalia, but it was really able to do stuff. But as Russia became more revanchist under Vladimir Putin, and as China became more powerful and started asserting its interests in a way that was contrary to what the Western powers were wanting to have happen, it became ever harder for the UN to do things. And we've gotten to a point where, really starting in the 2020s with Russia invading Ukraine, and then with the war between Israel and Hamas, and several other major issues. And Syria during the 2010s, where everybody in the West was like, we need to sanction the Assad regime who's massacring its own civilians by the hundreds of thousands. And Russia was an ally of the Assad regime, so they were like, nope. And they just vetoed resolution after resolution after resolution. They basically stopped the UN from doing anything except providing food aid across the borders. So this is the point where you have major conflicts going, really major flashpoints in the world, and you can't get the major powers to agree. And so we've gotten stuck. And that's why it feels like the world is sort of starting to unravel. People realize that because the Security Council members can't agree, they can get away with a lot of stuff. And so a lot of conflicts that seemed closed are sort of metastasizing and popping back open again. And this time, because you have the major powers unable to agree, you have a bunch of sort of middle powers each intervening in their own way. And so, if I can give an example, in Sudan, remember Save Darfur from the 2000s? So back in the Save Darfur era, I have issues with everything that happened, but the United States was able, everyone sort of agreed that what was going on in Darfur was lawful. And the United States and other countries were able to marshal this African-led peacekeeping mission to help protect civilians in Darfur, and it really did that. And you could largely agree on that. But now, partly because the great powers are distracted, but partly just because you can't get anybody to agree on anything, a new war has broken out in Sudan that might actually be worse than the original one. It's truly hideous. There's like these two generals who couldn't agree on sharing power, have just ripped the country apart. And there are massacres going on in Darfur that are at least as bad as before, but they're also going on everywhere else. But this time, there's no unity over what should happen. And so you have middle powers getting involved. You have the United Arab Emirates, you have Egypt, you have Eritrea, and Ethiopia, and neighbors, and civilians are fleeing back and forth, and countries are sending in weapons and backing this side or the other, and then somebody sends one side drones, and so they get the upper hand. And so there's no agreement on what should happen, and because of that, all of these different actors are intervening, and the conflict just keeps going. And that's happening in a lot of places. Sudan is probably the worst example of it. But if you can't get the major powers to agree on something, then it just becomes open season, not just for them, but for everybody else. And that's a really dangerous dynamic. And so we're seeing a lot of that. That's another reason why it seems like the world is unraveling. Nobody's even paying attention to Sudan. It might be the worst conflict in the world. But it's just like there's so many other things going on that it's almost like people don't notice. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, you've got Russia there's an article in the charter, it's article 27.3.
I like that joke.
That says that a country involved in a conflict, if they're on the Security Council, should abstain, should recuse themselves from the Security Council acting on that conflict. Well, so in theory, Russia should abstain. And not, but obviously they're not going to do that, and no one can force them to do so. It's more of a guideline. And so people want to pass a resolution calling for an end to the war in Ukraine, a ceasefire, nothing else. Say nothing of justice, Russia withdrawing from all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The UN Security Council, the Western countries bring that resolution, and Russia vetoes it, so the Council can't do anything. And so you wind up getting into this almost proxy war where the Ukrainians are defending themselves with Western help, and the Russians are attacking, and they're getting help from China, North Korea, etc., Iran. And that's very dangerous. And the Russia-Ukraine thing, in some ways, I think is actually the most dangerous conflict of all of them. Not just because you have great powers involved, and the question is sort of like, what's a red line? What could cause, Russia has been threatening to use nuclear weapons, which has not happened in a very long time, and is terrifying. But it really, more than any other conflict, the Ukraine conflict, to me, goes to the heart of the post-war order. The whole point of the post-war order, up until the World Wars, the world was largely run by empires. The Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire, British. And there was no, so on one hand they could handle diverse populations, but the downside, of course, is that it's imperial subjugation. And there's no real formal limit. So there are all these buffer zones, and so if Austro-Hungary and the Russians and the Ottomans are like, well, there's no reason, we should really have a decisive influence in the Balkans, and then the